Welcome to More Business, More Life podcast. And today my guest is Yasmin Nguyen, and he is going to share how he went from having 5 different businesses, not even sure if he wanted to live any longer, to now leading the Joyful Living Project and living, some of the most joy in his life. And how did he make that transition? We're going to really explore that today. Yasmin, it's so great to have you back on the show today.
Oh man, Steve, so good to see you. And thank you so much for having me on the show. I'm such a privilege to be here.
It's my pleasure. It's a treat to get to talk to you. And, as we've, you were on an earlier show with my show when we were doing them all on video. And so now we're really going deeper into the podcast realm so I can have more people like you on more frequently, because we're not always in the same city and it's hard to get on camera together sometimes. And, I guess, just to kick it off so people can get to know you a little bit, and then I'm sure we'll go to a lot of different areas. But one of the big reasons that we've been attracted to have you on the show, and more than once, is because of how you live and the choices that you've made. And, I know it's been almost 2 years now that you've been doing the Joyful Living Project, where you went from having, entrepreneurial career, multiple businesses, working like a crazy madman, to like, hey, there's got to be a better way to live. And you've spent the last 2 years traveling around all over, just spreading joy. So maybe since we, I think we last did our interview right when you were starting this. Is that right?
Absolutely. In fact, San Francisco was the very first city, and I think we connected the first 3 weeks of this journey. So just at the very beginning. And ever since then, it's been an incredible exploration across America, and even to a few international destinations too. And I would say that it's been one of the greatest, most memorable experiences in my life, and I'm excited to share some of the insights and things that I've experienced along the way.
Well, yeah, and that's definitely what we're here for, brother, is to hear those insights, because what a dramatic difference. So maybe let's first start off talking about that difference. So, you've now taken, so much choice in your life to kind of, in a way, liberate yourself to just go and be, and not just be for yourself, but like to just spread this good news and good word around the world, as you said, like even internationally. So what triggered this? I mean, like, so let's go back. Maybe if you can share just a couple steps back, that, because if I remember correctly, you have multiple businesses working so many hours, right? Maybe I know it's not as fun to talk about, but let's go back there for everyone to hear the transformation that you've come from.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, if we were to rewind the clock way back when I was 5 years old, my family had just come to America. We had immigrated from Vietnam, and really escaping the war that was going on back in the 70s. And growing up as an immigrant child, I found that I never really felt like I fit in. And part of my way of really adapting to that and trying to fit in was to achieve. That was really my sense of getting a lot of self-worth and recognition. And so that continued most of my life, being, a really high achiever, successful, working hard all the time. And eventually also realizing that the corporate track just wasn't the place that was aligned with who I wanted to be and the life I wanted to live. And so over the last 20 years or so, I pursued the entrepreneurial track, and have tried to chase a lot of different opportunities, varying degrees of success with businesses, from web and marketing company to a social club to a food business to being a landlord, and really about 6 years ago hitting that wall, realizing that that I was completely burnt out, and just didn't really know what I wanted to do, and was at a state where my health, my relationships, and everything was really suffering, and to the point that I actually had a moment where I was considering just taking my own life. And it was one of those moments that really woke me up to press the pause button and saying, hey, what do I need to do to really reconnect with myself? And that was when I started practicing this idea of going out to the Oregon coast, because I had lived in Portland, Oregon, And over the course of the next year or so, every week I made it a personal practice to create that space, to take that time off, to spend time reconnecting with nature and doing some reflection and practicing gratitude, and really choosing that space so that I could realign where I wanted to go. And that started this eventual journey that has led me to travel around the country. Was around last year, not last year, 2 years ago. Was I was having a casual meeting with my business coach, and the idea of traveling just kind of popped in my head, and I started to reflect on, well, where do I want to be a year or 2 years from now? And I realized that exactly where I was not where I wanted to be, and so I made a decision to give up my apartment, put stuff into storage, and hit the road, not really knowing exactly where I was going to be, what I was going to do, but knowing that that was part of the experience. That was part of the life journey to really discover what the next step is. And so many amazing things have come from that.
Wow, it's so beautiful, brother. And thanks for sharing that, Yasmin. I think that I'm most curious, and for all the listeners out there, is when you when you made that choice. So there you are, and there's so much you said. I mean, oh my gosh, we could talk about all of this because actually I'm going to go one more back, and then we'll come to my question I was just about to ask you. But is
Yeah.
this achievement thing, because I've been reading more about that. You know, it is a thing to belong, right? And sometimes when we don't feel like we belong, then a quest to be an achiever, to kind of show, hey, I can contribute, I can do this, is kind of in lieu of, and everything I've read about it, the more you achieve doesn't really solve that. You know, so is that, I'm assuming that's what you found. You're shaking your head no, but that's what you
It's
found as well. Yeah.
yeah, it's like this insatiable beast that you keep having to feed. You just achieve, and then what's next, and then what's next, and then you throw on top of that social media and all these things, where now you're playing this game of comparison as well too. And so it's just this ongoing uh, hamster wheel that really I found that it's sometimes you just have to get off of that, disconnect, and really find out what's really important. What's really important for me, and where does that joy come from? Where does that life, where does that connection, what's most important? And I think that unless we create that space, that pause to do that, it's so easy to get caught up in that spiral, that wheel.
Like a hamster wheel, yeah. Like, and this
Mhm.
happens so often. It could be so many different things of achievement. You know, like some people come to me and they've made millions of dollars, and they, you know, it's the idea that if I achieve this, or I have this money, or I reach this position, I become CEO, I build a company with so many XYZ employees, or whatever, anything you put that label on, um, and go for it. And then so many people I find that they get there and they're like, what? Like, it's like that it'll give you that thing that you're driving for, that in this case the sense of belonging, and then it's like, oh no, that didn't solve it. So you either just keep going forward and achieve the next thing and the next thing, and then you're on the wheel like you're talking about, or you wake up like you have and say, wait a minute, this isn't allowing me to find what I want.
Yeah, and I think it boils down to this lack of something, and in some case belonging, some case worthiness. But even you take that a step further, right? And I remember when we first met, you had asked this question: what does having that do for you? And what does having that do for you? What does having that do for you? Well, if you ask that enough times, for me, I've discovered that it boils down to just being loved and feeling loved. If I am worthy of enough, if I belong, then I'll be loved, and if I achieve enough, then and it gets to feeling loved. And sometimes that comes from within ourselves.
But yeah, I would probably say almost always, right? Like at some level, you have to love yourself to be loved anywhere
Hmm.
else, and no matter what we do, no matter how much we try to fill it up with anything else, it doesn't replace that. And you're right. That's my favorite magical question. What will having that do for you is such a great way to dive, and great memory, by the way. That it has that ability. And that's what I always say whenever I set a goal for myself, or when I'm working with a client or anyone, it's like whatever I say, whatever comes out of my mouth, I'm like, oh, okay, well, what will having that do for you? And then you can get to the root of that. And sometimes you find you either are really close to having it or you already have it. I've even had people, they already have it and they're like still going for that achievement, blind that we already have that thing. And we thought that we had to have more money to have it when it really wasn't true. Right.
So. Yeah. I use that phrase all the time, by the way, all the time. So thank you for that gift.
Well, yeah. And that comes from beyond me. So like, my teacher, Carl Buchheit, who actually my first mentor, Jeffrey Slater, brought that into my world, who was mentored by Carl Buchheit, who later became my mentor as well, and teacher, who also learned that from old time neurolinguistics. So it comes from like handing the baton by handing the baton by handing the baton. So many great people before us brought these words to our lips and tongue, and it's perfect. It's like I do say it's a magical question, because it really truly is. It gets to the root in a very simple way. What will having that do for you? Gets you right to the depth of the emotion and allows you to discover. And I do ask that question, like you said, over and over. I ask it over and over until I get to what's the root? What's the root of what I want? Yeah, it's so let's go now. This is the question I was going to ask, but I had to talk about that first. So, and we can even talk more about this. We'll see where this goes. But the next thing that comes to my mind is how you made this decision, because there you are, successful entrepreneur doing so many different things. And let's just say you're on that wheel, right? You've been running it for some time. And I just have to slow down because you said it so fast and it just went by, but you're like on a coaching call and then it's like, oh, why don't you just do this trip? Was it that casual? And you're just like, oh, okay, I'll just sell it. I thought so. Okay. So tell me the slow down version of that moment, because I think it helps everyone when we're making these big life decisions to live the life that we want. There's some story there. So, okay. So the first time you thought of this was on a call, or tell me a little bit more.
So I was on a one-on-one retreat with my business coach. We had driven from Portland to Victoria, Canada, and we spent the entire weekend in this nice little condo. And I literally put up more than 250 Post-it notes on the wall where I was outlining, this is what I'm going to do with my speaking business, my marketing business. And we had a whole plan worked out for the entire weekend. And so we were waiting for the ferry to come back to the States. We were on the Canadian side and we're sitting there in our car and we were just having this casual conversation about friends that we knew that were working remotely at some city or some destination. And I thought, wow, wouldn't it be great to spend maybe a few weeks or a month just working from somewhere? Then I started to think, well, what, I can't decide on one place because there's so many places I'd love to visit. What if I were to spend a month in a couple of different places? And then that was when reality kind of hit me like a big brick and said, well, that means I'd have to give up my apartment. And I've been in the comfort zone at that point in time for about 5 years now in a place, everything felt comfortable and I was in a routine. And I thought, well, if I give up this apartment, then wow, I'm going to be homeless. And how am I going to make this work? And how am I going to make money? And that was when I just felt this feeling in my stomach, like I was almost in a panic attack. And I look over to my coach. I said, Michael, I don't know what to do with this. I'm feeling this calling to go on this journey and to possibly, I don't know how it's going to work. And so on the ferry ride, we just talked it through. And by the time I got back home over the next week, I couldn't stop thinking about it. And I thought, you know what? The one decision that I have to make is, am I going to renew my lease or not? And that was going to happen in 3 months. And it took me about another week or two to figure out, you know what? I just have to do this. I just have to cut the cord. And regardless if I know exactly what I'm going to do and how things are going to move forward, I just need to make that decision. And the minute that I made that decision, I'm not going to renew my lease, then all the pieces just started falling into place. Back in the day when we used to have the radio and we had the dial, and you know how when you finally get it to just the right frequency, everything is crystal clear and aligns. Yep. And I kid you not, that's exactly how everything happened. I started to reflect on my body of work for the last 15 years, all the relationships I've built around the country, everything, and it just all started to line up. And the only thing that was missing was, why am I doing this? What's the purpose? What's the mission? And then I just had some clarity around joy. I want to find out what joy is, and for myself, but also to share. And that became the umbrella in which I created and the birth of the Joyful Living Project, which was really taking a look at where we are in our lives today with everything that's going on, and even more so today with
Right.
all the stress, the suffering, the pain, all of the things that we experience in life and our business too. And how can we discover moments and experiences of joy, and how can we expand that, and how can we grow and our connections being more together, having more fun, more freedom, all those things. And so that was my journey, was to go and discover that and figure that out. And that and at the same time, as I mentioned earlier, the realizing that I didn't want to wake up a year from now and be in the exact same place. I wanted to experience a different type of life, and that's what pushed me over the edge to make that decision.
Yeah, that's one. It's beautiful, and I do have more follow-up questions, but I have to interject. That's one of the things that got Giovanni and I to work together, because he has a project that we've kind of had in the background, and we are going to bring it up with the retreats that we do and everything. But he has a thing called wander working, where creating and facilitating and allowing this to become easier for other people to just take 30 days, go to a remote place, and then, kind of like a concierge, like where wander working would take care of everything, so that you could have a place to work, you could have a place to live, you can also embrace the culture, and it would be like a roaming service. So like maybe you do it in Costa Rica one year, then you do it in Africa, another somewhere in Europe, and then be able to contribute to that community wherever we are, and then also have teachings for entrepreneurs. And that's where Giovanni and I teamed up, so that I could bring some of the training that I do and bring that in. So it's great that all three of us are here in this moment right now, because what you've achieved and the things that we're working on, again, have so much overlap. It's beautiful, man.
That's really awesome. I can't wait to hear more and see how that evolves and how I can help too. Because I've through this journey, I've gotten connected with the whole incredible travel community, which is another amazing component to this.
Well, and it's a big part of what you're doing is traveling and then bringing that forth. Yeah. So, you're completely right. We'll definitely have to connect further after this, because you have all kinds of opportunity to introduce for this, for wander working, to have facilities and all the things that you've now come and play with. Maybe we'll move into that as we progress through this.
As travel is also evolving now as well too, I think there's a sector that has great potential that's aligned with what we're doing here, and I'd love to explore this more with my team here, with others that are aligned. But a segment of what's we call transformational travel, where you're not just visiting destinations, but you're really using that as a catalyst to really transform and to grow and to evolve and deepen relationships, and to enrich ourselves, so that we come back a better person, a more energized, a more connected, a more meaningful life. And I think there's such potential to add another layer of personal growth and development into travel as well. And I think that's aligned with some of the things that it sounds like you're working on too.
It's absolutely aligned. I mean, and I just wrote that down, transformational travel. I don't think I've used those exact words, but I think every time that I travel, and the way that I'm choosing to raise my children. So I think you remember we homeschool the children. And the main reason for that is that, well, one, I didn't want to be that working dad, which is what the family that I come through is also we're Italian immigrants, a few generations back, but they became workaholics again, like probably in that achievement thing, right? To fit in, because we weren't welcome in New York at that time. And when a lot of Italians came, and I was in that same thing, I was repeating this family pattern. And then when I became a father, I was like, wait a minute, this isn't okay. And so part of it was to be with my kids. And because I'm a speaker and teacher and traveling, we've been able to combine all those. And to your point of growth, and that transformation, it's absolutely true. Like for my children and for myself, it is a huge transformation. Every time I travel, I come back with better business plans, better business ideas. How am I, and all of my business is to help others. So the more that I take care of myself and my own growth, then the more I can help others. And it is, I always tell people they need to take more time off. Part of more business, more life. And we plan to certify companies. And in the next 10 years, we have a big goal of 100,000 companies. And one of the components and requirements is to work no more than 40 hours. In fact, we like to say less than 40 hours to have, and also build revenue, because what are the businesses going to want? They want to grow revenue. And then if they have growth in revenue, they can pay people more, hold on to their employees, but provide that better life, and then take more holidays. That's actually part of it. Travel away, like not staycations, like just days off work. We're talking about actually empowering people to travel, because when you do, and this is where it would be great to come back to how all, I'm sure there's so many things you've learned, but when you leave home, and even just the story you just told, you just said you were like in Canada, so not too far from home, but just the fact that you left and giving that space, I guarantee if you were just having like a regular coaching call after a day's work, you wouldn't have had this same contemplation. So it is that a way that allows us to do something dramatically different, changing our environment, focus on that to create some sort of change inside of ourselves at a more rapid pace. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. It's the environment impacts not only the way that we think, but also how we feel, and how we feel then activates our creativity and all these other possibilities. So it's getting out of that box physically and mentally.
And speaking of that, getting out of the box. So, okay. So I'm going to go back to the story now. So you're
Mhm.
back there, you have 3 months to make this decision. It sounds like pretty quickly, like I think you said within a matter of a week or two, you made the decision to just not renew the lease. So then if we slow down time even more, because I like to do this so that we all have that moment of fear popping up and all these things, and cause us not to make this decision. So what was going on for the Yasmin, if you go back to that time and you're making that decision? I know that after that, everything started to flow your way, but before you open that portal, let's say, or whatever that was, what was going on for you to make that decision possible? Just curious.
Oh man, I know that the biggest concern was, how am I going to make a living? Because up until that point, a lot of my business was doing video production and also consulting, and a lot of things that were local there in Portland. And so how am I going to make money? How am I going to live? Which, the survival piece. But then beyond that, where am I going to live? If I'm going to hit the road, what am I going to do? Stay at hotels, stay, with people? And so there's all of these questions that I just didn't have answers to. And I also remember, well, what are my parents going to think? What are my friends going to think? It was all of these external uncertainty and questions. And I remember uh, continuing my practice of going out to the coast, because that was my getting away to think, to connect with nature, and to, in some ways, in a spiritual way, download some answers through meditation. And it just started to shift for me in a way that I started to reflect on times in my life where things just worked out, where believing that it's going to be okay, releasing the attachment to exactly how it has to happen, it's always worked out. So then I started to ask myself, well, how is this any different? I packed up my car, drove across the country 15 years ago, not knowing how I was going to make it in Portland, Oregon, just because by visiting there, my friend, for a week. And here I am 15 years later with all these accomplishments and all these connections and all that. I did it before. How is this any different from that? And by reflecting on those previous successes, it gave me enough courage to just sign that piece of paper, turn it into the leasing office and saying, look, I'm not going to renew, and it's going to work out. I don't know how, but it's going to work out.
Yeah. It's so amazing reflecting on as I'm listening. I believe this too. I think sometimes in our younger years we take on a little bit more risk, and as we get older, and not like, it doesn't have to be like an old man, old woman thing. Like it's, just even like 10 years, or like you said, 15 years later, we were in this comfort. And I find this a lot with my clients and even in myself. And before I rapidly started my growth plan, the process that I went through, you start to forget all the things that you've done in the past, and even the way that we learn. Like I find that, as we get really good at something, or we become an expert in something, that when you go to learn that next new thing, we're like, oh, I can't do that, or I'm not good at it, and we forget how many years it took us to become the expert that we are. And it's like we all crawled before we walked. And it's we can learn, and we can continue to learn. So it's interesting how we put ourselves in that position that you had. And in your case, there's no metaphor about it. You literally packed all your stuff up and traveled all the way across the United States, and then here you are making the plan to travel again, like literally, and then saying, "Wait a minute, I did this before. Why can't I do it now?" It's
Yeah.
so beautiful.
Yeah. And, if you've ever used binoculars before where you kind of zoom out, and when you zoom out, you like, oh, it's actually clear now. I think that zooming out piece was really looking at the last 15 plus years has actually been training me, getting me ready for this journey. All the relationships that I built, that I got a chance to reconnect with people as I traveled, all the knowledge and skills that I've developed, all these things that I've done. It's zooming out and seeing the bigger picture, that it's not just in this one moment where I have to make this decision, but it was in the bigger scheme of things, this is just the next logical step.
Yeah. It's so beautiful. And then and then taking the importance away. This is something I'm still dealing with in my life. I think we all do. We put so much importance and weight on some things. And the best way I've been able to train myself is to not get so caught up in the how. I think the weight and importance comes from like, okay, we have this idea. And especially if we're goal oriented achievers, entrepreneurs, business people, they're in your career, and you're like, okay, right away, what are the step by steps? How are we going to get there? And it's good. I'm not saying not to plan. I'm not saying that, but I am with you to relinquish the importance. And the more that I've done that, the other roads appear. So it's not giving up on the goal. It's giving up that importance that it has to go down this road and then turn left and then turn right. When you let that come more organically, then it's so much easier than forcing down the path that we thought we had to go down when really we didn't have to.
And that is so true. I think that's been one of the keys to, at first I would say, surviving this journey, but really thriving in this journey, is having clear intention of what is it that I want to feel and to experience, but releasing the attachment to the exact how it has to happen, where it has to happen, when it has to happen. And one of the examples of this multiple times was, I had mapped out a route to travel around the country, and it was really based on seasons and weather. So I didn't want to be stuck in Michigan during the winter, and in Texas during the middle of the summer. But as I was mapping out this route, there were certain destinations that I had planned on my calendar, and I said, I'm going to be here on this date. And as the time got closer, so for example, I was in let me think, where was I? I was in Charlotte, North Carolina, and I was supposed to go to Washington D.C. And I told my friends, I said, I'm going to show up in D.C. next week, and plans just started to fall apart. My friend I was going to stay with, some scheduling things happened, and people I was going to meet, and I, instead of trying to force it, because I had forced things a few times, and I can share those moments where things didn't work out, I started to reflect, is this the joyful path? Is this, because I said I was going to be there, does it mean I necessarily need to be there now? And I really thought for a while. It's like, no, this is not the joyful path. And I just happened to be on a call with a friend of mine who's in Miami. And she says, hey, why don't you come on down and hang out with us? And I thought, wow, from Charlotte to Miami, that's like 14-hour drive, detour in the opposite direction. But I thought, you know what? Every time I spend time with my friend Annette and Eddie, I always brings me so much joy. And so I was like, you know what? I'm going to bite the bullet and make that drive. So I drove all the way down, and Florida is got to be almost as long as driving across Texas here. But
Yeah.
I finally get down to Miami that night, and it was around 9:30, and we're having a late dinner together. And Annette, my friend Annette, says, "So, what do you want to do in Miami?" And I said, "Quite honestly, Annette, I had no plans on going to Florida at all on my journey here. But while I'm here, I heard that there's great Cuban food and culture, and so maybe we could go out and eat and listen to some music." And she says, "Great, let's plan that." And so we were going to do that over the next course of the next few days. And so I'm sitting there in her office the next day, and we're just brainstorming some business, some marketing ideas. And she has a business where she creates travel itineraries for people to go to Italy, to France, to Cuba, to all these different places. And I was asking her, I said, "Do you create any video content to help your guests learn more about those destinations, get them excited and all that?" And she's like, "No." And so we started thinking, well, how do we create these videos? And her boyfriend, who was sitting next to us, his name is Eddie. He says, "You want to go to Cuba this weekend?" And I'm like, "What?" He's like, "Yeah." And so she hops online, checks flights, checks things. Next thing you know, an hour later, we're going to Cuba, and this is a Wednesday. So by Saturday, we're on a plane to Havana. We get there, and because she's connected to all these travel organizations, we get the most incredible experience. We're staying at this private home, and we're in an RV going out to the countryside, and I'm documenting this whole journey, and it was amazing. And I get back and I think, wow, if I had stuck to my path of going to DC and forcing it, this whole opportunity would never have happened. And it's about staying connected and clear to the intention of connection and joy and fun. And you talk about, freedom and allowing these opportunities to happen, and then appreciating those opportunities too. And so that's just an example of the magic that continues to happen on this journey that I could never have imagined sitting there in my apartment. Should I go on this? Should I do this or not?
Yeah. How much would you have lost if you would have stayed in your apartment, brother?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, you're saying, but I think it's immeasurable, right? I mean, how could you even measure what you had lost if you would have made a different decision 2 years ago? It's and for those of you that can't see him, he's just like staring at me because there's nothing to say. There's nothing you can say. Like, it would be like tremendous loss. And even thinking of it now you're focused even more on travel. Like, so it's interesting that this is a friend that was in the travel industry and working on that, and now you're putting even more of your life force towards this. So it's like even a double down. Not only did you follow the joy and enjoy, but that's kind of part of it. I think, feelings, I have to bring this up again. I know you and I probably talked about this before, Yasmin, but for everyone to hear this, and people that have been listening to me for a while, they probably hear me say this a lot, but it's so true. Like, I ignored my feelings. Let's go back in time for you and I both. When we were workaholics, you didn't take time to smell the roses. You didn't take time to say, hey, how do I feel? That's why, then it would just come in loads. We just feel like crap, and we're like, oh, where'd this come from? But you know what? It was happening every day, every hour, because we were just overlooking it, because we're just barreling through life. And I think these are the indicators that are telling us we're on the right path. When our heart and our mind can align, then the outward reality can become what we want. And I think it's when we get too much in our head and we're so focused on our businesses or these things, we're sacrificing the feelings. Our heart are like screaming out and saying, no, there's something else, or we're not in alignment. And then it becomes harder and harder, and it doesn't feel as good. So that's feelings. It comes back to that when it's not feeling good, I look at it now, it's a mechanism inside of my body, just like the feelings. If I put my hand towards a hot grill or like a fire, we hope that our hand pulls away, and usually it does without us even knowing, just pulls away. We can't even, it's a reflex. Right. And we have that same reflex for other things, like going the right direction, but they're a little bit more subtle, right? Like, oh, you could have decided to go to Washington, I think you said Washington, D.C., or, to go up there, and you could have forced that. And then how much longer would it have taken for you to learn this lesson, or to get deeper into travel, and what would have been lost? But you listened, you've learned this lesson. You're like, oh, this isn't working out that well. Why not go a different path? And physically, geographically, it was way off path, but on a spiritual sense, it was exactly on path.
Yeah, absolutely. And and I realized that this is something that it's like any muscle that I've been practicing. And the practice was creating that space to really reflect and to notice and to explore what that feeling is. Because it's so easy for us in life to have these negative, uncomfortable feelings, but we just keep pushing on and we just kind of brush them off. And by creating that space in our life that I was doing before and continue to do, it then raises that level of awareness that then allows us to then make a more conscious decision.
Yeah, it's so huge. I mean, really, really big. And what I and just I try to make mechanisms so that we can create some processes for those that are listening. And one thing that I have to bring back up is that you created a practice that you went to the coast once a week. Did I hear that right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So you would take a day, and so even if it was a weekend day, or did you take like a
No,
weekday off from work, or
this
how did you do it?
it was always a Wednesday or Thursday, and it was intentional because I knew that if I were to go on the weekend, then it would just be just another weekend. But if I took a day in the middle of the week where I said I'm not working, it was a conscious decision to, and back then I called it practicing retirement, practicing what it was like to not sit there in a conference room, in a cubicle, or whatever in front of my computer like everybody else was, and say, you know what? I am going to choose today as a day for myself. And regardless of what I need to do, and sometimes I needed to shift things around, but it was always during the middle of the week because I knew if I practiced that, that mindset would set in terms of I am choosing freedom. I'm not abdicating into when, but I'm choosing it now. And I'll work on the weekends. That's fine. I'll work on the weekends and then think to my head, I'm actually getting ahead. Nobody's working today. And then I'm going to take the day off. So it was like a little mental game that I was playing with myself.
Right. But
And
then you started to slow down and
mhm,
find the space to reflect and big notice the feelings. And
mhm,
mine wasn't like exactly like your. I mean, obviously none of our stories are exactly the same
mhm,
pretty much ever, but it was meditation. So mine started in micro moments of meditating for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, and then upwards to like 30 minutes a day. Once I got into this ritual, and that mindfulness started letting me take more breaks, take more holidays. It just started to spread out because you started to notice the power that giving myself that breath, that space to notice my feelings, then aligned myself more with my success that I have today, the freedom. And so I think it's beautiful. You created space for yourself on a weekly basis, and then that I really think if you weren't doing that, we wouldn't even be talking right now. Like, so, I mean, it
no,
started there. So I think, would you agree that that was kind of the starting point of
it,
all
it,
this?
it really is. That's the pattern interrupt. That was the waking up moment, right? Is that space is so important. And it's something that I teach a lot. You know, I've had an opportunity on this journey to share not only how do we have experience more joy in our lives. And I remember when I was in Vancouver, Canada, about a little over a year ago, just another opportunity to travel here. And one of my fellow classmates, we were in this training class to learn how to lead tour groups, and this was part of the connection to this community that came about on this journey. And so my friend, her name was Sheila, and she happened to have a couple of lines on her wrist. And I approached her and I said, hey Sheila, what are those two lines on your wrist? And she says, well, why don't you guess? And I said, is that an 11? She's like, no. It's like, is it an equal sign? She's like, no. It's like, well, what is it? So Sheila says, that's my pause button. And I was like, your what? She's like, your pause button. Anytime that life gets stressful or I just need a moment, I just press my pause button. And I thought that was the most just mind blowing thing. I was like, that's incredible. I want a pause button. And so I got invited to speak at one of the largest travel and tour companies in Denver last summer. And I remember them asking me to come in and talk to their sales team because they're about to start their busy sales, sales season, and everybody was going to be stressed out and feeling burnt out and overworked. And so I wanted to come in and give them some ideas and some tools and some strategies. And I thought, wow, I would love to give every single one of these people a pause button. But the challenge was, it's hard to find temporary tattoos, at least custom ones. Then I thought, maybe what if I got some tattoo markers and I can just write on their arms? And I thought, what, people don't want to be written on. And so that was when I just had a moment. And I thought, those wristbands that we have,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
yours,
The guy went on too.
right?
Yeah.
I was like, what if I put a pause button on the wristband here and I can give it out? And that really is the key to creating that space that I learned from my trips. And then I thought, well, there's more space on this. So what if I added a joy button here that at any
Nice.
point in time they would press pause, create that space, and then press joy to really reflect on what brings that richness, that fun, that happiness that in my life, and then press the play button, which is it's all about creating a practice doing something that activates it, joy. And by having these three buttons, having that pause, which was the catalyst, the key,
Right.
this is a tool to remind us to create that space for that shift.
Wow, it's so beautiful, and it is right there in your wrist, and yellow, so it's
Mm-hmm.
like bright and right there, and to remind ourselves. I mean, even that's the things that I choose to wear. Even are
Mm-hmm.
about travel. Like, this comes from South America, and it has five pieces of metal in here, remind my family, because there's five of us. I have three children and my wife, and then
Mm-hmm.
I'm wearing beads from Peru, and then I've got my New Zealand greenstone from that, and I wear these not to idolize them in any way. It's actually just to remind myself of the travel and the time of pause and reflection, and how many things I've learned from those spaces and being with different people. It's all tied together in what you're doing, brother. It's amazing. And to speak to that, like, this is, I think, where you're kind of putting more energy right now, right? Like almost planting a flag, right? In this idea that you've spent the last 2 years with the Joyful Living Project and traveling around, and now you want to help other people travel as well. Is it with that? How would you put it? Like, because I know you're extending the Joyful Living Project in a bigger way, it feels like now, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, my initial intention was to do an 18-month journey across America, to meet people, have conversations, discover joy, and I've actually gotten an opportunity to kind of to distill it down into a framework in a poem that I'd love to share with you in a little bit.
Okay.
But after that 18 months, I really had to think about, so what's next? And those 18 months ended at the end of 2019. So beginning this year, I was trying to decide, well, what am I going to do? Am I going to continue my travels, or am I going to settle down somewhere and work on something and do a deeper dive? And so I made a commitment to start working with an incredible organization that I had met around the exact same time I met you in the first month of my travels.
Wow.
And it's a school that's been around for 46 years now, and they train these tour guides and tour leaders. And these are the people that, if you've ever been on a vacation or been to any tourist destinations, these are the people that are telling you the stories and the richness, and sharing with you the joy and the passion of all these different places and experiences. And so the school has been training them, over 8,000 students over the last 40 plus years. And I got just unexpectedly connected with them, again, for my very first month. And what's interesting, and I'll come back to this, I'm going to go on a tangent for just a second, if that's okay,
Yeah, go for it.
is you think about, how do you meet people? And it's following the breadcrumbs of connection. And I can trace back 15 years when I first landed to Portland to how I got connected to this company. And so I think back when I first arrived in Portland. My only person that I knew, and the only reason why I moved to Portland was my friend Amber. And Amber introduced me to her friend Maria. And Maria and I were at a networking event. We met Tyler, and Tyler and I partnered up to create these dinner parties where we would connect and introduce people. And that's how I met this guy named Courtney. And Courtney introduced me to Terry. And Terry had an event where I met this girl that I dated named Holly. And Holly introduced me to Kathy, and Kathy introduced me to Steve, and Steve introduced me to Jeff, and Jeff introduced me to Shandy, who I had just met before I left Portland. And she said, you should meet my father. He lives in Sausalito. He knows everybody. And so I called him up. He says, come over to my house, and I'm going to host a few people to have a conversation about joy. And that's how I met Ted and Joan, who were the founders of this school. And so you think about appreciating every single connection that goes back a decade and a half to get to this very point. It just blows my mind. But getting back to the travel, I over the course of the last year and a half, I've continued to connect with their community and realize that these weren't just tour guides or people leading groups, but these are actually joy ambassadors. These are people that are sharing the beauty and the moments that when you are seeing the Grand Canyon for the very first time, you've saved your money to do this, or if you're a student and you're seeing the Lincoln Memorial. I mean, these are moments of incredible joy, and these people are right there in that moment facilitating that. And I wanted to be a part of this community, and I wanted to help. And so taking all the skills of marketing and business development, all these things that I've done before, I've been welcomed in as part of the family, and it's such a gift to really be active in the organization and take a leadership role, and now really helping reimagine how the next 10, 20, 30 years looks, because, especially during our times where things are shifting, the way that we do business and all that. And like what you're doing with your business too, I feel like part of my role now is to help this organization, and then along with that, with these relationships and skills, create incredible transformational travel experiences for people and share that. So that's kind of where I'm at.
It's so beautiful. I mean, I'm with you 100%, and I think for me, a part of me wants to say any travel is transformational, but then when you put the intention behind it, it gets even greater. So it's such a beautiful thing, and it doesn't surprise me at all. Like after everything we're going, like I'm like, yep, this is perfect for Yasmin. So it's like, it's so wonderful, and thank you for even connecting all those dots. The famous saying that Steve Jobs said keeps going in my head as we keep talking about this, but he says, you cannot connect the dots looking forward, but only looking backwards. And that's what's happening. Looking at all these dots that connected to make this moment right now plausible are beautiful. And I'm just gonna, you and I can talk about this for hours, but just in our time that we have, I'm curious. You said you've, over this course of this 2 years, you found some framework for joy. Did I hear that right? Maybe is that something that we can share in a few minutes?
Yeah. I initially wrote it as a poem, but it's really become the framework in which I teach now.
Okay.
And so let me see if I can pull this up. If you give me 1 second here.
No problem. I know I'm putting you on the spot, but I think it's worth sharing. I mean, here we are 2 years later almost to hear your conclusions and the framework that came from this. And fun, I put it as fun as one of our core values. And I always define words, so if we have core values, I didn't want to just be a word and leave it there, but it is to live in joy, to enjoy all that we do. And when we're not finding joy, that's an indicator for me that we're going down the wrong path. So this is something that I found, and that's why I so resonate with you, brother. So yeah, if you're ready,
share. I'm ready. Yeah. And speaking of finding joy, so here we go. It starts off, would you like more joy today? If so, don't hope for joy, as joy is waiting for you. Don't search for joy will find you. Don't chase joy, as joy will follow you. Joy is not what we lack. Joy is what we notice. Joy is not what we earn. Joy is what we practice. Joyful living is a daily practice of life in a way that invites joy into each moment. So practice gratitude, practice kindness, practice empathy, practice connection, practice movement, practice adventure, practice generosity, practice receiving, practice wonder, practice creativity, practice vulnerability, practice forgiveness, practice rest, practice reflection, practice adversity, practice savoring, practice discovery, practice teaching, practice faith, practice loving, practice presence, and practice playfulness. Each time we practice, we remind ourselves of possibilities. These possibilities activate hope and remind us that no matter how stressful or challenging our day may be, we can have a moment of joy. And in each moment, we deposit joy into our hearts. So by the end of the day, we see that we've had a joyful day.
Wow, it's beautiful, brother. It's 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 that if you're okay with that, I'd like, if you can send that to us, I'd like to include that in our show notes and what we're putting out there when we get this episode out to the world. And I think as you were reading that and all the practices, I could just imagine like different and this is where my imagination went, like different trips that you were on where that word became the word. I'm sure that there's a lesson in every one of those practices that you've listed off there.
Absolutely. And each one of those has multiple stories that I've chronicled along the way on my social media, and which will all be compiled into, a book as well too. And also part of this transformational travel experiences where, let's say, we go to a destination and we practice a number of those pieces.
That's we're all rooting for you, and here, and for sure myself, I think as this comes, please keep us in the loop on all of these areas, because we'll be happy to promote your book when it comes out, and all of the things that you're doing, because they mean so much to me, and they're definitely part of my teaching. I know that we find our joy through allowing ourselves to go in the path that we're meant to go on. And that's why I think you're right. You don't have to chase it. You don't have to, fabricate these things. It's actually always right there. It's comes, that word noticing is the one. I think if you start to notice where you're happy and you're not happy, then that's the indicator of, are you burning your hand off in the fire, or are you not? And I bring it to that extreme metaphor because I think it's so easy for us to ignore that. So I think, man, I lift all of what you're doing up high, like, just that you're spreading the word that you have been doing for the last 2 years. And I know you'll continue to do so. I think you are bringing gifts to the world, brother.
Oh, thank you. As are you, as are we. We're, Giovanni as well, everyone.
Yeah, it is. The more of us doing this, the more we spread it. It's that ripple, and the more ripples we create on the water, then, the more movement we have in a really good and positive direction. And so, just, I would say, just, and not that you wouldn't do it any other way, but I just have to say, keep being you, keep doing what you're doing. Just sending all kinds of encouragement your way, brother, because it's so needed. Like, how many, and this is a great way to like wrap up this podcast. I mean, just to all reflect for a moment, how many people are like you and I were when we were just grinding away, and they're not living, and that, we know that really the reality is we all have choice, and we just have to slow down enough, whether you do what I did, where you take 5-10 minutes, 30 minutes just to sit still and bring a journal, would be recommended, to write down what comes to your mind in that moment, or do what you did, which is awesome. And I would encourage people to do this, because it's even better, is just to take a whole day and go somewhere to reflect. What an amazing step to take in anyone's life, and look at what it's transformed in your life and my life. Just quite amazing. I guess in closing, would there be anything you'd add to like that first step for you, do you think, Yasmin?
Well, I think going back to just creating that pause, creating some sort of practice, some mechanism, whether it be an alarm that you set every 5 hours or whatever it is that wakes you up to be able to create that pause and saying, hey, I'm going to take the next 5 minutes. I'm going to take the next 5 hours. I'm going to take the next 5 days, whatever it is that wakes you up from your patterns. And then take that opportunity to create that space, that pause. And in that pause, that's where you discover joy. You discover, you get clarity, you get, connection, whatever it is. But you've got to have that initial space.
That's it, brother. The pause button. I love it. And I love that you brought it into a bracelet. I love it. And if folks want to follow you and follow the Joyful Living Project, what's the best way to find you? And we'll put it in the show notes too.
Sure.
What's the best way?
The best way is just the website, joyfullivingproject.com. And that's where I have links to my social media posts. And I'll be working on adding some more blog content here and there, but really that's the best way to connect.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for coming on the show, and it's been a pleasure.
Oh, Steve, it's been such a gift to join you and to be invited to connect with you and Giovanni and your community. So thank you so much for that gift.
It's our pleasure, Yasmin. Thanks for sharing your stories, and everyone, choose gratitude and create freedom, as we always say. And we look forward to hearing from you. What was the biggest aha or takeaway from today's podcast? Sharing that on our social media. I hope you got a lot of value out of this today, and I will look to see you on our next episode. Thank you so much for listening. Thanks for listening to the More Business, More Life podcast. I hope you got value. And if you did, we have so many more things for you at stevenapolitan.com. You'll be able to connect with us on social media. We are active. You can ask us questions. And then on top of that, I want to give you a really big gift. And it truly is. We want to give so much value. We have an offering. It's a program called Clear Path to Customers. It's the same way that we attract wow clients and only working with the right people, the people we want to. And it's transformed my business into millions more in revenue with the right people and my clients. And we're doing it absolutely free. So you can go to stevenapolitan.com and grab that. You just got to put in your information. We'll send it to you promptly. And that again is on stevenapolitan.com. I look forward to having you on the next show. Until then, remember, choose gratitude and create freedom.